Lawyers and law enforcers. What are the most common laws people understand incorrectly? Many people assume that if the police, in the USA, don't read you your Miranda Rights when you're arrested, it means you win the case. Not so. It only means that you may get things you said excluded from trial, if you said them in response to police interrogation while in custody. I got arrested and they didn't read my rights until we got back to the station. Unlike in movies and TV, where they read them right away usually. The whole time I had a shred of hope that they would forget and I would get off because of that. It can ruin the DA's entire case, however, particularly if the person who is arrested makes the classic mistake of talking to the cops. Basically, if they don't read you your Miranda rights and you subsequently confess to the crime, that confession goes out the window, along with anything they've got on you as a consequence of that confession. For example, you confessing and telling them where your stash was, etc. Unless they can convincingly prove that it was not as a result of that. For a lot of minor crimes, the DA actually will not pursue it if your Miranda rights weren't read to you, as the level of difficulty has increased too much. I should point out the above only applies to evidence gained after arrest while the police are interrogating you. I'm just clarifying that's what I'm referring to, not you spontaneously confessing in the back of the cop car. The European Court of Human Rights has nothing to do with the EU. Actually, I did not know this. It's not quite true. The ECTHR initially had nothing to do with the EU, but now the EU is a signatory and EU countries have to be signatories. Tell that to the tabloids. I hate seeing the two conflated so often. Is this a common error where you're from? It's kind of willful ignorance on behalf of people in the UK who think we should leave the EU for no reason other than recovering our sovereign power. Lawyer here. I like when people say, "I'll see you in court." No, you won't. Most of us rarely ever go through a full-blown jury trial like on TV. We avoid jury trials as they're expensive and time-consuming. But saying, "My attorney will see your attorney at a settling table at one of their offices to work out a reasonable agreement," doesn't quite have the same ring to it. I like that one better. Feels less like an escalation. Less, "You will be hurt for this," and more, "This'll get sorted out by professionals. This is my pro's number. Have your pro call them. Cheers." No, as a dramatic diva of a man, I have to say that not being able to scream, "See you in court," at the slightest inconvenience would be a significant detractor from my life's enjoyment. That you're entitled to one phone call from jail if you're arrested. This is not actually a constitutional requirement or even a nationwide standard. Telephones wouldn't need to be invented at the time of the drafting of the Constitution in order for a constitutional requirement, or right, to attach to the technology. Case in point, the Supreme Court's unanimous decision this week that a warrant is required to search a person's cell phone, an extension of constitutional search and seizure protections to cell phones, which didn't exist until 1872, more than 20 years after Thomas Edison invented the Constitution. That some of your rights only apply to the government. Yes, a private citizen or business owner can certainly inhibit your right to free speech. More people need to recognize this. As a weapon owner, my individual right to own and carry a sidearm ends the moment I go from a public place into a private business or resident's abode. If they disagree with me, they have the right to remove me from their premises however they see fit, as I'm now infringing upon their right to exercise, or not exercise, their Second Amendment rights within their walls. I use the Second Amendment as an example because it's the easiest to convey since there's a physical object involved. This applies equally to all rights though. In the cliché example of shouting, "Fire!" in a crowded theater, this person is infringing upon the exercise of a business's First Amendment rights. Because they would be within the walls of that business, the business rights trump their right to say what they want. Furthermore, in the theater example, the person who shouted fire could also be charged for needlessly causing mass hysteria, which is against the law as well. Freedom of speech is restricted in certain cases. Almost. Fire in a movie theater is an example of limits to free speech in a public space, as it threatens the livelihood of your co-citizens. It's an example of the clear and present danger portion of the incitement test, which is commonly known as the prohibition of inspiring an angry mob into action with free speech. So yes, if the US had a Tahrir Square and it was filled with angry protesters, you might not be allowed to get on a megaphone and demand revolution. It would depend on how likely the protesters would be moved to violence in the near future. I like to joke that you can advocate the overthrow of a government until there's a chance of anything actually happening about it. Businesses are not required to accept your 10-pound bag of pennies because it's legal tender. It just means that you can use that to pay and debts that you have. And as you're not in debt to that business, yes, they can refuse your legal tender. This concept came up on Reddit a while back. What I took from it was that McDonald's can refuse your money, but Applebee's can't. Yes, when you want to eat something at McDonald's, you're effectively proposing a trade for the food. When you want to eat something at Applebee's, you're going into debt for the cost of your meal. All debts in the US must be able to be paid off with US currency, but no one has to accept an offer to trade with US currency. It depends on whether you're considered a debtor or not. For instance, if you're attempting to purchase something, then you're not in debt to the store and they can refuse to accept the payment. However, if you tow my car, impound it, and then tell me that I'm in your debt for X dollars, and that you will not return my car until then you would have to accept X dollars worth of pennies unless there was some existing contract between us that said otherwise. That only the government or the government employees acting in their official capacity can violate a person's federal constitutional rights. To use a somewhat outdated example, the Duck Dynasty guy has a First Amendment right to say what he wants, but A&E can fire him for it, call him up, rehire him, fire him for practicing his Second Amendment rights, call him up, rehire him again, and fire him for petitioning the government. They may be violating American ideals, state constitutions, or federal and state statutes, but they are not violating his First Amendment rights because the Constitution only binds the federal government, and selectively state governments through the 14th Amendment. A&E is not a government entity, so the federal Constitution doesn't prohibit it from doing anything. I hate how no one on my Facebook seems to understand this. People seem to think that pleading insanity means getting off. Generally, you go to the mental health facility until you're cured. Possibly forever, well, just until a board of doctors are willing to bet their reputations that you won't break any more laws, instead of prison for X years. The amount of time spent locked up after a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is almost always longer than the amount of time that would have been served if found guilty. However, sometimes, the institute is a much better place than the prison you would have ended up in. You never really hear about mental health facility gangs. They think they see you, but it's just the schizophrenia kicking in. Basic federalism principles, the idea that federal law trumps state law. Mary J. may have been legalized in a given state, but you're still breaking federal law, which still classifies green herb as a Schedule I controlled substance. So sure, the state police won't arrest you, but the DEA can still arrest you. Furthermore, and I can't stress this enough, if you're in federal territory of any kind, green herb is illegal. California respects medical green herb. If you have a card, that's great. But once you step into Yosemite National Park, it is illegal, and the Eastern District of California is more than welcome to prosecute your rear end for possession. It's strange, I would have thought that a national park would be a great place to wander off, have some green herb, and feel close to nature. Although I feel like this particular law isn't going to stop many people from doing so. Age of consent. Most states have a sliding scale. In Missouri, it's 17, but if you're under 21, your partner can be 14 years old. However, laws on publishing videos and pictures of it are different for obvious reasons. You can legally do the deed with your 17-year-old partner, but you can't take pictures of it. There is case law exactly on this situation. Also, marginal tax rates, more accounting than legal, but they are tax laws. A lot of people believe that your entire income is taxed at a certain rate based on how much income you made that year. Rather, it's a sliding scale where the first portion is not taxed at all, then another portion is taxed at a low percentage, then the next portion is taxed higher, and so on. If I knew the percentages, I would quote them, but I'm not looking them up. Sadly, the ACA was not created this way and can create some really dangerous income issues for people receiving subsidies. Oh man, I'm an engineer and some of my coworkers still don't understand marginal tax. You'll still hear talk of, I hope I only get a 2.9% raise this year, because 3% will bump me up into the next tax bracket. It's baffling. Some of the most commonly misunderstood ones, they can't arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. If you don't sign any documents, you can't be found guilty. Yar, take to the sea. Do not remove this tag under penalty of law except by the consumer. No, you won't go to jail for ripping tags off mattresses or pillows. The consumer is allowed to remove the tag. Are you sure? Actually, yes and yes. The tags are regulated for businesses that sell them, so the consumer can know what they're buying. So this all came about because at one point, companies were advertising one thing and selling consumers something else. There are so many cases where government regulation makes sense and is the only thing protecting the swimmers from the sharks. Exactly. Without these tags, manufacturers could fill mattresses, pillows, etc. with any material, even material from used mattresses. Yuck. Once you buy it, you can rip the tag off. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to pull rank on you. I didn't want to have to do this. I'm with the mattress police. There are no tags on these mattresses. I get tons of calls asking if they can get a divorce for adultery or abandonment. This is despite the fact that most states, Ohio and New York being the only holdouts, did away with fault divorce over 30 years ago. In Kentucky, we went no fault to divorce in 1973. Long story short, in an argument with my then wife while on the phone with my lawyer, found out she had cheated, she screamed that infidelity was not grounds for divorce. My lawyer replied, "She is correct, but infidelity is grounds for a custody suit." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm in law school right now, and many people in Germany don't exactly know the lifelong prison sentence. It's not really lifelong like some people believe. It's imprisonment for an indefinite time period, but minimum 15 years. The average lifelong prison term is about 20 years. This varies by country, and in the USA, by state. If you get a life sentence in the state of Pennsylvania, you will die in prison, barring appeals or revocation of sentence. Other states, like California, are like Germany, where a life sentence can mean you're eligible for parole after a predetermined amount of time. Lawyer here. All of them. People are idiots. Redditors especially. Breaking Bad taught me that, contrary to popular belief, undercover police officers are not required to answer truthfully when you ask, "Are you a cop?" Long story short, don't sell substances. I never quite understood how people could believe this was possible. Probably because they confuse it with entrapment. Entrapment is baiting people unreasonably to do something they wouldn't normally do. Undercover is pretending you're not a cop to see what people normally do. Bird law. People think they can keep hummingbirds as pets, but they're illegal tender. Not saying I agree, it's just the bird laws in this country. It's not governed by reason. Let's say you and I go toe-to-toe on bird law and see who comes out the victor. Filibuster? Thank you to everyone for furthering this debate on the very important points of law raised in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. How your stuff gets distributed when you die. No, it doesn't all go to your husband or wife most of the time. No, your $10 LegalZoom rocket lawyer will is not good enough most of the time. Estate planning attorneys don't pay the bills by selling wills or power of attorney. People who die without wills or with poorly drafted wills keep our lights on. When my father died intestate, that is, without a will, the laws of the state specified that half of his estate went to his wife, my mother, and the rest was divided amongst his children, me, my brother, and my half-sister. That was simple enough until my half-sister became estranged from the rest of the family and was out of touch with my mother, her stepmother. And then my father's mother died intestate, leaving money and property to my father's estate and his living sister, my aunt. My father's share of my grandmother's estate needed to be split, half to my mother and 1/6 to each of my father's kids, but nobody knew where my half-sister was. Eventually, several years later, a company wanted to acquire rights to some of the property that had been my grandmother's. An agent of that company had to track down all the heirs, and discovered that my half-sister had died. That agent was then in the awkward position of telling my mom that her stepdaughter was dead. Oh wow, I've been waiting for this question. Being protected from discrimination does not mean that you're protected from buttholes. In other words, your employer or co-worker is allowed to decide he doesn't like you, which means he's discriminated between you and another person, so long as he hasn't made that decision based upon your race, color, or religious belief. In other words, you're not entitled to employment. The only thing you're entitled to is to not be discriminated against based on something out of your control, such as your skin color or your gender. The age at which a child in the United States can decide which parent they wish to reside with is, wait for it, 18. Yeah, that's right. If you're a child, you're not allowed to make decisions for yourself. That is up to the family court judge to make based upon the best interests of the child. We have free speech in this country. That means that if someone says something to you that you don't like, you can't sue them for libel or slander unless all of the following apply. Number 1, it's false. 2, it's been communicated to a third party, not just to you. 3, it affects your reputation for morality in the community. And 4, you have suffered either or both emotional and physical health repercussions as a result of the statement, or financial repercussions, or all 3. There are certain things that, if said, do not require number 4, such as a statement that you have a venereal disease. That's called slander per se, but these are rare statements, so usually you need number 4. Double jeopardy, thanks to the movie of the same name. Please expand. What is misunderstood about this? In the movie, a woman is convicted of murdering her husband. Once she gets out, she finds out that he's still alive and set her up for murder. She then hunts him down and murders him for real because she can't be tried for the same crime twice. Double jeopardy actually means you can't be tried twice for the same instance of crime, but it doesn't mean that if you are falsely accused of one crime, you now have free rein to go commit that crime for real. In that situation, the two crimes are not the exact same occurrence of a crime. One was a previous crime, and one was a totally separate, later crime. As another example, let's say Guy A is arrested for beating up Guy B on charges of assault and battery. Years later, Guy A beats up Guy B again. Arresting and trying him a second time would not be a double jeopardy in the real world, but it would be under the logic of the movie. A good way to demonstrate the other side of double jeopardy is the O.J. Simpson case. He was tried in criminal court, possible prison sentence, and found innocent. He was later tried in civil court, basically only fines and settlements, and found guilty. Double jeopardy means that you can't be tried for the same instance of a crime in the same court. You can still be tried in the other, civil and criminal court, for the same instance of the crime. So don't go write a book about how you committed a crime after getting off at one court. Actually a lawyer here, and there haven't been many stories from other actual lawyers here because we don't want any of you to think that we've given you some kind of legal advice that you're going to end up relying on that turns out wrong for wherever you live. For example, if you're in Ohio, I could probably give you some solid advice. Any of the other 49 states or any other countries? Not so much. Sure, there are general rules that we all get from the SCOTUS, but even that can be open to interpretation by lower courts, and SCOTUS typically set floors or ceilings. Miranda, for example, sets forth the minimum warnings that police are supposed to give you. Some state could easily add more warnings to that. So it makes it kind of hard for us to give you guys advice on this stuff because depending on where you live, we might be wrong. There we have it, folks. I will note that I remove a lot of the not a lawyer headings because otherwise they get repetitive, and we should take note that most of these posts are both from the questioned profession and bystanders. I just pick the stories that seem credible-ish and entertaining. A hostile work environment is not illegal in and of itself, it's only unlawful if, among other things, the hostility is based on a protected characteristic such as race, gender, age, disability, religion, etc. In short, it's not illegal for your boss to be a butthole, it's illegal for the butthole to single people out because they belong to a protected class, though. I think people commonly confuse assault and battery. Assault is threat of imminent harm. Battery is unlawful physical contact. In the UK, if I punch you from behind, that's battery. If you see me punching you, assault and battery. Assault is fearing imminent violence upon yourself. It's not someone punching you. It's what happens before someone punches you and you fear being attacked. In Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms only protects you from the government impeding the rights laid out in the document, not from other private entities doing it. My divorce lawyer friend says common law marriage. There are only 9 states that recognize it, and even then it's not clear-cut. Someone will be breaking up with someone after 10 years and tell her they get half, right? Because of common law marriage. Sorry, not in this state, she always has to tell them. In the US, specifically Texas, jurisdictions vary, you do not have the right to a free attorney for criminal cases. The law states that you have the right to have an attorney represent you. If you cannot afford one, then one will be provided for you. My judge, an IMA prosecutor, routinely denies the public defender for people requesting a lawyer after looking at their financial situation. The person who throws the first punch is not necessarily the offender. New Zealand here. No, you can't sue anyone like they do in America. Full stop. End of story. Don't ask me again. Get out of the courthouse. You don't need a body to prove a murder. You just need to show so much evidence that a missing person is dead and has been murdered by the suspect to prove murder. This has led to some misunderstandings. There are 2 falsely held beliefs that are sort of related. One, that you never have to give the police your consent to a search. If they have the ability to search your car or property, they wouldn't be asking you for consent. You wouldn't believe how many people don't understand this. 2. The police and their agents can and will lie to you. People seem to think driving under the influence means actually driving. Drunk and in your car with the keys within reach? Yeah, that's a DUI. Doesn't matter if the engine wasn't running, at least in most states. Which, to be fair, is a pretty crappy law, but you're right about how it works. Not a law per se, but the concept of judicial review. I'm amazed at how many people struggle with the idea that when the US Supreme Court hands down an opinion on a question of federal law, be it constitutional law, statutory interpretation, or what have you, that the court's word is final. That is, of course, until the law changes, from a constitutional amendment, congressional repeal, modification, enactment of statute, etc. Freedom of speech means that the government can't arrest you, fine you, etc. for anything you say, barring conspiracy to commit a crime or hate speech. It in no law protects you from any other consequence, such as an employer firing you, an establishment banning you, etc. Jury nullification. This isn't some hidden constitutional trick. It's a de facto circumstance through which a jury can acquit a person who would otherwise be guilty under the law if the jury disagrees with the law. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and it almost certainly won't work for you when you shoot at police for violating your constitutional right to live in a tree or whatever. At-will employment? Yes, you can probably be fired for that. No, you probably can't sue your employer. Proving discrimination in an isolated circumstance is almost impossible. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.